Welcome back to Bloody Elbow. Today I am joined by Combate CEO and UFC co-creator Campbell McLaren. Before we get to talk about some kind of overall MMA topics, we'll start with the recent developments with Combate, where you announced you're going to be moving from Miami to LA. Talk to me about the positives that come with this move, and if there are any drawbacks, what they are.
Drawbacks. I'm not sure I see any, but look, I don't want to bash Miami. It's a great city. It's a fun city, but look, Hollywood is the media capital of the world, really, and I think that what we saw in Miami was. I don't know how much you know about the U.S. Hispanic audience, Kyle, but it's close to 3/4 Mexican American. And Miami is a city that's sometimes called the capital of South America. So you have Cubanos, Dominicanos, Colombians. It's a real mix of South America, where moving to LA, we are able to reach the vast majority of U.S. Hispanics. I mean, think about it. What's the population of Britain? 55 million, something like that. So the U.S. Hispanic audience is bigger than Britain, it's bigger than France, and it's bigger than Germany. And so by moving to L.A., we do a few things. We put ourselves in the center of the media world, and we play to our largest fan base, which is Mexican Americans, and secondly to Mexico, which is quite close to LA as well. So there's that's not a geographic difference, but it's a center of the universe, a center of the group of fans that we're really aiming at. Now, you'll still see Cubanos and Venezuelans and Colombians and Ecuadorians and everybody else fighting in Combate, because we celebrate the Spanish-speaking world. We have fighters from Spain as well. So it doesn't eliminate anyone, but we feel it really super serves this great audience in primarily in the West Coast of the U.S.
Yeah, and obviously we're going to see the effects of that pretty soon, because you announced that there's going to be the 20 shows taking place with the Estrella Studios. What can people expect from that in terms of how different is it going to be compared to what people are used to with Combate?
Well, it's bigger, but I think we've developed Miami or LA or pre-COVID, when we were a traveling circus. Before COVID, before we went into the TV studio, and if you watch the UFC's Contender Series, that's how we do it. Only ours looks a lot better, and is more fun and has a better set, and has better TV coverage. But it is in one place. So every 2 weeks, every other Thursday, we'll be out in Burbank in a studio that seats close to 600 people with a dramatic set, a dramatic entranceway. I mean, it's just going to look super cool. But our style of fighting, we've developed over the years. We've been in Peru, Colombia, Mexico, all throughout the U.S. And we've developed this style that we call much more action, mucho más acción. And it comes out of the differences in what I did when I started Combate. So when I started the UFC, I really started with grapplers, primarily Brazilian jiu-jitsu guys who were learning how to strike. And we've seen that in the evolution of how the UFC does it. And it's still to a great extent dominated by grapplers. They're coming less from Brazil and more from Dagestan and former parts of the Soviet Union, and it's Sambo rather than Jiu-Jitsu, but it's still a wrestling base, because Spanish-speaking countries emphasize boxing, Taekwondo, and to an extent Muay Thai. I have strikers that use grappling defensively. So we tend to see a much more active form of MMA. There's still groundwork because it's mixed martial arts, so you've got to mix. Jiu-jitsu is a highly effective form of fighting. So you're always going to see that in anything MMA. We're not like some of the pure striking promotions out there, but ours is a more active style. And furthermore, I think the best fighters in the world are signed to the UFC. The best fighters in the world, 25, 26 years old to whatever, 40. So we operate a lot like the football academies do in South America. We go in and look for very young people, 16, 17, 18 years old, and oftentimes are signing these new fighters to pro debuts. So you've got to understand this in the context of their world. So I take a 19-year-old fighter from Chile, and I am paying him what is essentially an annual salary, 1 year's salary in Chile. And his abuela, his granny, is watching. He comes in with the Chilean flag around him because, like the World Cup, we do country versus country. I'm sure you saw Scotland's into the second round. I've already, my whole family's from Scotland. My cousin Clark Campbell has already messaged me this morning that he's coming out to stay with me. Anyway, so like the World Cup, we do country versus country. So you take a young person that's getting paid quite a bit of money in their own country, representing that country, knowing their family is watching. It's the biggest moment in their life. And because we have a very active and dynamic style of MMA, much more action, combine that with the youth and the opportunity they're giving in Combate. The fights are spectacular. I mean, I contend, I've openly admitted, the best fighters in the world, 25 to 40 years old, are signed with the UFC. There's no way around that. They're, fighters with 30 fights under their belt that have trained with the best camps in the world. That's how it is. However, I would say the most exciting fighters in the world are in Combate because oftentimes this is true in any sport. As the athletes get a little older and get a lot richer, they tend to do less to potentially injure themselves in their competition, regardless whether it's fighting or football, right? And so when you have someone that's very young, they are not concerned about that. They are concerned about putting on the best show they can. So I think I can say when you watch Combate, you will see the most entertaining, exciting fights in the world. Now, if I brought over John Jones or, pick someone and brought them in to fight some of my fighters that have 6 professional fights, that wouldn't look so good. But with our matchmaking and the young fighters, and as they grow, that formula will change. And I think in a few years, we will be challenging the UFC. And there's a few fighters that have gone from Combate to the UFC that are doing quite well over there. David Martinez may be the best example. So we've got the most exciting fights. We have the most exciting style of MMA. And here's another thing. DAZN, their boxing thing, I can only quote U.S. prices, Kyle. I'm not sure what it is in the U.K. or in Europe. But if you want to see DAZN's boxing pay-per-views, it's $500 a year. That's a lot of money. If you want to watch the UFC on Paramount, I think it's $140 a year. ESPN with PFL is very close. I think it's $120 a year. Combate is free, yo! Free! Very free. Free means you don't have to pay anything. So you're getting the most exciting MMA for free.
When you speak about Combate's style being much more action, you mentioned then about when the UFC was created, the whole idea was the clash of styles, who can come out on top with their style. We've seen this year, there have been a couple of big performances in the UFC that were very, very dominant, but not necessarily the most entertaining. Islam Makhachev's recent title win, for example, was a perfect example of that. What's your thoughts on?
Example is I don't remember the fighter's name, the guy that they cut, even though he had won and went to fight in Brave.
Makayev.
Yeah, like that guy. That's the most boring fight I've ever seen, and I didn't even watch it.
Fair enough. When you see people criticizing either the fighters or whatever it is for these performances, what's your take on it? Because you co-created the UFC to be this clash of styles, to see which style came out on top. But even yourself, right? Combate, you promote Combate as it's all about the action. So I just wonder what your thoughts are when people criticize the sport for maybe not being that entertaining because of one style being dominant over others.
Kyle, that's a very insightful question, and I'm not sure I've ever been asked it that way. And I get asked a lot about the UFC and the differences in Combate. That's a very good question. I think, first off, you've never seen me, and you will not see me criticize fighters. I think that unless you're in the cage, in La Jaula, in the octagon, it's a tough gig. And, it takes a certain personality and a certain huge amount of courage, et cetera. So now, will I say a fight is boring? Well, yes, I will. And I do think that your question is, I can't answer it in one word. Let me back up a second. So, yes, the UFC was started, the Ultimate Fighting Championship was started to find the dominant style. And the Gracies knew they were, right? And no one saw it coming, and they were unbeatable. That's when I started adding college and Olympic wrestlers to counter them, right? But I think in UFC 7, a fighter named Marco Huas shows us what happens if his jiu-jitsu was so good, no one wanted to go to the ground, but he had those low Muay Thai kicks, and he was also a tremendous puncher. So if you stood up, you got hit in the face or kicked in the shins, and if you went to the ground, you got choked out. And that's when the MMA part came together, and it wasn't the Ultimate Fighting Championship anymore. It started to be the UFC. So, you can have different versions of that. MMA is the sport. UFC is the style of the sport. And when Combate, our Spanish-speaking fans are relatively new to the sport. Like Nielsen, which is the big research company, said 91% of our audience isn't watching the UFC. So they watch Combate. Now, when we broadcast in English, and we were on Paramount, until we were displaced by the UFC, in English, we tend to have the announcers and the commentators speak to the audience a very different way. We talk about the ground game much more. We talk about the subtle differences in the sport. For the Spanish-speaking fans who the sport is new, I'm talking about the excitement and the flavor and, the knockouts. So it's different. I think, Floyd Mayweather was a great boxer, but I'm not sure it was the most entertaining boxer. In fact, when I saw the Pacquiao, I went to the fight of the century, and I know Floyd a little bit. I'd done a TV show with him. And I saw him later after the fight of the century, and I went up, I go, Floyd, can I get my money back? Because that really wasn't the fight of the century. And he got pretty angry. But he wasn't going to hit me or anything because, he's professional and he gets paid to hit people. So I think fights can be boring. Yeah, fights can be boring. And I think, Dana White's very much aware of that, right? He doesn't want boring fights. And what is a boring fight? To an extent, it's stalling on the ground or standing up or not engaging, right? So what we've done in Combate is, we all use the same rules. The unified rules. Everyone uses the same rules. But what we do is we talk to the commission and say, our fighters are more stand-up than ground game. And if they're on the ground, there's a good chance they're stalling. And you should be aware of that. And the commission's response to that. We want to see action. I mean, after all, it is a fight.
Yeah, you mentioned some of the things, just there even, that Combate does differently to the UFC, not only with the studio setup and the things that it does differently to the way the UFC have the Apex, but also the fights themselves, the styles. When you look at the UFC now, if you were there today, is there one thing that you would change?
What's your background, amigo? Where did you go to school?
I went to my local university to do sport journalism, and then covered MMA for a few years, and then here we are.
The questions are good. Most questions are stupid from MMA.
Thank you.
Yeah. So look, the bar is low, but you're actually asking good questions.
No, I appreciate it. Thank you.
What would I do? First off, Dana White is the greatest promoter of both the 20th century and the 21st century. He outperforms Don King, Bob Arum, and I'm the second best. And if I hadn't launched the UFC, there wouldn't be a Dana White. But he's a great promoter. And I think his greatness comes from how much he anticipates the fights that the fans want to see. Now, that training comes out of the pay-per-view business, because if you don't put on a fight the fans want to see, the fans won't buy it. So now moving his model to, a subscription series, it's going to be interesting to see if Dana is still as focused on putting on the fights the fans want to see, or if he maybe is more interested in putting on fights that build a particular fighter, or perhaps more of an economic advantage in that they get paid less. There's a lot of things that are going to change, I think, with the Paramount Plus deal. What would I change in the UFC? I don't know. I mean, it's pretty perfect as it is, right? I mean, if you look at it, it's a sport that is relatively corruption-free, which few sports can say, including football, right? There's been a lot of corruption in the football business at the highest levels. I think that the athletes, for the most part, are fairly well compensated. The fights, for the most part, always deliver. And I think Dana White is the biggest star at the UFC. And he tends to be at a lot of the shows. So the biggest star is always showing up. So what would I change? I would change their ownership to my ownership. That'd be the only change. But I look, as perfect as nothing's perfect, as good and as perfected a model as the UFC has become, doesn't mean there can't be another way to do it. And I do think Combate is different. The fighters are younger, the fights are more exciting. It's a whole group of people that have been overlooked. When I went to when they opened the new Performance Center in Las Vegas in their new headquarters, I went over there and, when I saw Dana, and a guy named Mark Ratner gave me the tour of the place. And he knows, I'm a naturalized American citizen, Kyle. And I was 7 when my family moved from Scotland. My dad was hurt, and he was hurt flying in the RAF and didn't want to be in the UK anymore after he couldn't fly. So we moved. But I'm still a proud Scot, and and I have all the attributes and personality quirks that many of my countrymen do. Like, I like fighting, and I like to argue, and I don't care about the odds against me and all that kind of stuff. So anyway, so they all know I'm kind of a loud and proud Scot. So I'm in the UFC, and they say, "Look, Campbell," and they have this big mural board where they have all the flags of the countries, and they go, "There's Scotland's up there. Do you know there are 5 Scottish fighters in the UK?" And it was Stevie Ray and Joanna, and I forget who else. And I go, 5? Wow, it's great. I mean, this country of 5 million people. I go, "How many Mexicans?" And they go, "I don't know, 5." And Mexico's got 130 million people. And you have the same number as my tiny little country. And that's when I really realized they were not focused on Mexican Americans, Hispanic Americans, Colombians, Chile. They did one show in Chile many years ago. They haven't been to Colombia. They haven't been to Argentina. And so I've got this whole group of people that love to fight, Kyle. Mexico, you know what one of our highest rated shows is? Mexico versus Ireland. Because both those fighters fight the same way. They line up toe to toe and they beat the crap out of each other. And you've got to knock them out to stop them fighting. So I've got these great fighters, great athletes. a great, primarily boxing is the martial art of the Hispanic countries, but also Taekwondo. So I've got this great tradition, and the folks fight like crazy. So would I change anything in the UFC? No. Would I do the same thing as the UFC, starting my own fight promotion? Absolutely not. So I started Combate. I think there's a huge difference. I think it's very, very different. And I doubt I'm ever going to challenge in my lifetime, ever going to challenge the UFC in terms of size. They have, 32-year anniversary, was it last week? So they're way ahead of me. But I think I can grow this organization to be worth a lot of money and put on a lot of fights and generate interest, not from Spanish speaking countries. Because again, if Mexico versus Ireland is one of our most popular events, it was funny. The Irish fighters would come to Miami, and within a day and a half, they were all so sunburned, because, they came and they were pale pink when they arrived and they were bright red when they left. Just a classic matchup, classic two fighting cultures. And that's what Combate is about. It's a clash of cultures. And I'm going to keep rambling here and say, the UFC goes back and forth on whether they let people in with flags, right? Because if someone brings a Palestinian flag, that's pretty controversial, right? If someone brings a Ukrainian flag, that's pretty controversial, or an Israeli flag, or, keep going, a Russian flag. Anyway, keep going. We give the fighters the flags, because when a Chilean fighter fights a Peruvian fighter, those countries only fought one war in their history, and it was against each other. And when we have Argentina versus Mexico, everybody roots for Mexico because everyone hates the Argentinians, right? And then when I have US versus Mexico, a lot of folks are getting mad at the U.S. these days. Why? I don't know. What could we be doing? We're such a nice, friendly country. So USA versus Mexico is a very hot one for us. So we do this sort of country versus country, culture versus culture, encourage you to represent your home team. Smaller weight classes. We're the only ones with atom weights, 105, women 105. Our fighter, Lucera Acosta, La Loba, is, according to Nielsen, the most watched women's MMA fighter in history. More people saw her than saw Ronda Rousey. And, we have a lot of differences. There's different ways to do MMA. It doesn't just have to be the UFC. Look, KSW, I'm sure. Right?
Yeah, of course.
So they're very different than the UFC. To me, it looks almost like a cartoon or anime. The guys are so big and jacked up, but it's different and it's fun. It's different. So I think, the idea that the UFC is perfect, maybe it is, but that doesn't mean it's the only thing. There's a lot of different soft drinks in the world, but there's only one Iron Brew, right? And because it's so different and it's so, and if you like it, you like it. Maybe Combate's like Iron Brew.
Maybe.
I got to explain that to my audience. If they're going to go, what's Iron Brew?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we've only got a few minutes left, so we'll leave it there. But I really appreciate your time, Campbell, and congrats on the move with Combate, and congrats on the World Cup qualification. That'll be fun, I'm sure.
Thank you.